The night I was kicked out, the rain was coming down so hard it felt like the sky itself was angry with me. I was 15, standing in the doorway with a backpack I hadn't packed myself, listening to words that would carve themselves into my memory forever. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking with rage and certainty. She didn't ask. She didn't listen. She didn't even look at me the way a mother looks at her child. She just believed a lie and decided I was no longer worth keeping. It started that afternoon, quietly, the way disasters always do. I came home from school soaked because I'd given my umbrella to a friend. The house felt tense the moment I stepped inside. My stepfather's shoes were by the door, which meant he was home early. That never meant anything good. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, arms crossed, jaw tight. On the table was her phone, screen facing down, like it was hiding something poisonous. She asked me to sit. I did. My heart was already pounding, even though I didn't know why yet. Then she accused me of stealing money from her purse. I laughed at first, because it was so absurd. I told her she must be mistaken. I hadn't even been near her room. That was when my stepfather stood up behind her and said my name the way people say it when they're done believing you. He said he saw me near their bedroom that morning. He said I'd been acting strange lately. He said he knew kids like me. I didn't even understand what he meant by that. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to defend me. To remember that I was her child. To ask a single question in my favor. Instead, she told me she was disappointed. That hurt more than the accusation itself. I begged her to check my backpack, my pockets, my room. I told her I would do anything to prove I was telling the truth. She didn't want proof. She wanted the situation to end, and blaming me was the fastest way to do that. The rain started just as she opened the front door and told me to leave until I learned how to tell the truth. I asked where I was supposed to go. She said that wasn't her problem. I asked if I could at least wait until the storm passed. My stepfather answered that question by pushing the backpack into my chest and closing the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, stunned, listening to the deadbolt slide into place. Then I walked. I didn't have a plan. I just followed the streetlights until my shoes were soaked through and my fingers were numb. I ended up under the awning of a closed convenience store, hugging my knees, trying not to cry because crying felt like admitting something was wrong with me. I kept thinking my mother would come looking for me. That she'd realize her mistake. That any minute I'd hear my name. I waited until morning. No one came. The next few weeks blurred together. I stayed on friends' couches until their parents started asking questions. I learned how quickly kindness runs out when it becomes inconvenient. Eventually, a school counselor noticed something was wrong. I smelled like damp clothes. I stopped turning in homework. I flinched when adults raised their voices. That was how I ended up in the system. Foster care wasn't one thing. It was a series of temporary lives. Some houses were loud, some were cold, some were worse than the streets. I learned to keep my head down, to never get attached, to expect disappointment. I also learned how invisible you can become when no one is obligated to care. What hurt the most wasn't being kicked out. It was being erased. My mother never called, never wrote, never asked where I was. On my 16th birthday, I waited for a message that never came. That was the day something inside me hardened. I stopped hoping she would come back for me. I stopped needing her apology. I focused on surviving. I worked after-school jobs under the table. I saved every dollar. I studied at night because grades were the only thing I could control. Teachers started noticing. One of them helped me apply for scholarships. Another helped me find a program that helped kids like me transition out of foster care. By the time I turned 18, I had exactly two things to my name: a duffel bag and a quiet, burning determination to never be powerless again. I moved into a tiny studio apartment with a mattress on the floor and a folding chair for furniture. I worked 2 jobs. I went to community college. I slept 4 hours a night and told myself it was temporary. I told myself pain was an investment. Years passed. I built a life slowly, brick by brick. I learned skills. I took risks. I failed quietly and tried again. I didn't talk about my past because people either pitied you or judged you, and I didn't want either. I wanted respect. And I got it. By my late 20s, I was doing better than I ever imagined. I owned my car. I had savings. I had a career I earned without shortcuts or favors. I surrounded myself with people who knew nothing about the kid who stood in the rain with nowhere to go. I thought the past was behind me. Then one afternoon, I got a message request on social media from a name I hadn't seen in over a decade. My mother. Her profile picture showed an older version of the woman I remembered, smiling like nothing had ever been broken. My stomach twisted. I didn't open the message right away. I stared at the screen, feeling 15 again, soaked and shaking. When I finally read it, my hands went cold. She said she missed me. She said she thought about me all the time. She said she was sorry for how things ended. She said she wanted to reconnect. She didn't mention the lie. She didn't mention the storm. She didn't mention the night she told her child to get out. But I remembered everything. And she had no idea what that single sentence, get out, had turned into. The message sat unread for days after that, even though I had already read it a dozen times in my head. I kept hearing her voice from that night, sharp and final, cutting through the sound of rain. I wasn't ready to answer her, because answering meant reopening a door I had spent years sealing shut. I told myself I didn't owe her anything. Still, curiosity is a quiet, dangerous thing. Eventually, it won. I replied with one sentence. I asked her why she was reaching out now. Her response came almost immediately, like she'd been waiting with her phone in her hand. She said she had always wanted to find me but didn't know how. She said life had been complicated. She said she was older now and realized she had made mistakes. Reading her words felt like watching someone rewrite history in real time. There was no mention of the accusation, no acknowledgement of the storm, no apology that actually named what she had done. Just vague regret, carefully worded to avoid responsibility. We exchanged a few more messages over the next week. She asked about my life. I kept my answers short and neutral. I told her I was working. That I was fine. That was all. She told me about hers. My stepfather was gone. They'd divorced years earlier. She said he had changed, that he'd become controlling and reckless with money. She said she hadn't realized how much damage he'd done until it was too late. I wondered if she heard herself. Then she asked if we could meet. Every instinct in me said no. But there was another part of me, the 15-year-old who never got answers, who needed to see her face and know for sure. So I agreed, on my terms. A public place. Coffee. 1 hour. When I walked into the cafe, I recognized her instantly, even though she'd aged. She stood up too fast. When she saw me, knocking her chair back. For a moment, she just stared, like she was trying to reconcile the person in front of her with a memory she'd buried. She cried almost immediately. People nearby glanced over, uncomfortable. She apologized for everything, again without specifics. She said she'd thought about me every day. She said losing me was the biggest regret of her life. I listened without interrupting, my hands wrapped around a cup I didn't drink from. When she finally paused, I asked her one question. I asked if she still believed I had stolen that money. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. She said she didn't know what to believe anymore. She said my stepfather had convinced her at the time. She said things were confusing back then. She said she'd been under a lot of stress. Every excuse landed like a confirmation. She still hadn't chosen me. Not really. I told her the truth. I told her I never took $1. I told her what that night did to me. I told her where I slept, how I bounced between houses, how I learned to be alone because I had no other choice. Her face crumpled as I spoke, but I didn't soften my words. I'd spent too many years carrying them quietly. She said she wished she could go back. I told her I had already lived the consequences. The hour ended. I stood to leave. That's when she asked the question that made everything click into place. She asked if I was doing well now. When I said yes, she smiled through her tears, a smile that looked relieved more than proud. She said she was glad, because she needed help. She didn't say it directly at first. She talked around it. She mentioned medical bills, credit cards, the house she was about to lose. Then she finally said she hoped, as her child, I could help her get back on her feet. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. She hadn't found me because she missed me. She'd found me because she was drowning and remembered I existed. I told her I needed time to think. She reached for my hand. I pulled back. We left the cafe separately. Over the next few weeks, the messages increased. She sent childhood photos. She sent long paragraphs about how hard things had been for her. She said she'd told people about me and how proud she was of the person I'd become. The praise felt strange, unearned, like she was trying to attach herself to a story she hadn't been part of. Then she asked directly for money. She framed it as a loan. Temporary. Just until she got back on her feet. She said family helps family. The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I did something I'd learned to do very well. I gathered information. I quietly looked into her situation. What I found made my stomach twist in a familiar way. She hadn't just been unlucky. She'd been reckless. She'd taken out loans she couldn't afford. She'd trusted people who promised quick fixes. She'd ignored warnings. And at the center of it all was the same pattern that had ruined my childhood, believing the loudest voice in the room and refusing to question it. I realized then that nothing had really changed. If I gave her money, it wouldn't fix anything. It would only teach her that she could abandon me once and still come back when it was convenient. That realization hurt, but it also clarified something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. I replied with a long message. The longest I'd ever sent her. I told her I was sorry for what she was going through, but I couldn't help her financially. I told her rebuilding trust would take more than messages and tears. I told her I hoped she found stability, but it wouldn't come from me. Her response was instant and furious. She accused me of holding grudges. She said I was punishing her. She said she'd done her best as a parent and didn't deserve this. The switch was so fast it was almost impressive. 1 minute regret, the next entitlement. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply told her that night in the storm was the day she lost the right to ask me for anything. Then I blocked her. For a while, I felt numb. Cutting her off hurt more than I expected, not because I missed her, but because it confirmed something I had hoped wasn't true. She hadn't changed. She'd just run out of options. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong, because what I didn't know yet was that she wasn't done trying to rewrite the story. And the next move she made would force everything that happened in the rain all those years ago into the open, where she could no longer pretend it was just a misunderstanding. And that was when the real consequences began. I found out what she'd done by accident. A coworker pulled me aside one afternoon and asked, carefully, if everything was okay with my family. The way she said it made my stomach drop. I asked why. She hesitated, then told me she'd seen a post online that mentioned my name. A long post. Public, emotional, and full of lies. That night, I searched. It didn't take long to find it. She had written a detailed story about being a struggling mother abandoned by an ungrateful child. She talked about sacrifices, about how she'd tried to protect me, about how I'd run away at 15 and cut her off. She never mentioned the storm. Never mentioned the accusation. Never mentioned telling a child to get out in the middle of the night. She framed herself as the victim and me as the cruel ending to her story. What made it worse was the response. Hundreds of comments. People praising her strength. People condemning me. Some even speculated about what kind of child would do that to their own mother. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. For years, I had stayed silent. I had believed that healing meant moving on quietly. But reading those words, seeing strangers judge a version of me that didn't exist, something shifted. Silence had protected her long enough. I didn't respond right away. I took screenshots. I saved dates. I pulled together records I'd never thought I'd need. School reports showing the sudden drop in attendance after I was kicked out. Messages from friends' parents who'd taken me in temporarily. Old emails. Even weather records from that night, confirming the storm she claimed never happened. I wrote everything down, not emotionally, but clearly. I wasn't going to fight her with anger. I was going to tell the truth, calmly and completely. When I finally posted, I didn't tag her. I didn't insult her. I simply told my story. I described the accusation. I described being told to leave. I described walking into the rain with nowhere to go. I explained how I survived afterward. I included proof, not dramatically, but matter-of-factly. I ended by saying I had stayed silent out of hope and fear, but silence had become complicity. Then I logged off. By morning, my phone was full. People began connecting the dots. Some apologized publicly, others privately. The tone online shifted fast. Her post, once full of praise, became a battleground. People started asking her questions she couldn't answer. Why hadn't she called the police if money was stolen? Why had a minor been kicked out? Why did her timeline not match documented records? She deleted her post. Then she messaged me. Her tone was nothing like before. She was panicked. She accused me of trying to ruin her life. She said I should have come to her privately. She begged me to take my post down, saying it was harming her reputation, her chances of getting help, her future. I told her the truth didn't ruin lives. Lies did. She threatened legal action. I told her I welcomed it. She went silent after that. A week later, someone else reached out. A relative I hadn't spoken to since I was a teenager. They said they'd seen my post and wanted to apologize for not asking questions back then. One by one, messages like that came in. People who had believed her version because it was easier. People who hadn't wanted to get involved. People who now saw the full picture. The strange thing was that I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. For the first time, the story didn't live only inside me. It existed in the open, where it belonged. A month passed. Then too, I heard through others that she'd lost more than money. She'd lost sympathy, lost the ability to control the narrative, lost the comfort of being seen as the wrong parent. The same people she'd leaned on before now kept their distance. I didn't celebrate. I didn't check her pages. I didn't need to. What mattered was what happened next in my own life. I started sleeping better. The recurring dream of rain faded. I found myself talking about my past without my chest tightening. I realized that the revenge I'd imagined as a teenager had looked very different. I'd pictured confrontation, shouting, justice delivered loudly. What I got instead was something quieter and more powerful. I got my voice back. One evening, I received a final message from her. It was short. She said she hadn't meant for things to go this far. She said she was sorry if she'd hurt me. Even then, the apology was conditional, wrapped in self-protection. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because the moment she told me to get out, she thought she was ending my story. What she never understood was that she was forcing me to write my own. Every step I took afterward, every choice I made to survive, built something she could never take credit for. I wasn't strong because of what she did for me. I was strong because of what she did to me, and what I did after. The storm that night had soaked my clothes and frozen my hands, but it had also washed away the last illusion I had about who would save me. Standing in that rain at 15 felt like the end of everything. It wasn't. It was the beginning of a life where no one could ever tell me to leave again.